8 matches, 8 completely different stages, one extraordinary day of football that refused to stay in any single corner of the world for longer than it took to ask the next question. Dijon dismantled Versailles with a ruthlessness that French football's second tier rarely produces so cleanly. Chad and Burundi cancelled each other out in a goalless draw that contained far more drama than the scoreline dares to admit. Kobe found the only goal they needed against Hiroshima in a contest that Japanese football delivered with its usual disciplined precision. Notts County continued their remarkable habit of winning away from home by silencing Harrogate 2-0. Barnet put Cambridge to the sword with 2 unanswered goals. Reading edged Wigan in a 1-goal thriller that felt like it could have gone either way until the very last breath. Blackpool found enough to beat Burton by the same margin, and Leyton Orient produced the afternoon's most dramatic result, coming from behind to beat Exeter 2-1. 8 stories, 8 sets of supporters carrying the result home, and not a single scoreline that tells you what it actually felt like to be there. Dijon 2-0 Versailles pre-match. What does it mean to play football in Dijon, a city whose global reputation rests almost entirely on mustard and wine, and yet whose football club carries an ambition that has absolutely nothing to do with either? There is something quietly defiant about Dijon's football identity, as though the club exists specifically to prove that a city does not need to be famous for sport in order to be serious about it. Does that defiance translate onto the pitch, or does it remain something that lives only in the boardroom and the terraces? Versailles arrived with a history more associated with palaces and grandeur than with football grounds and late tackles, and yet here they are, competing in the professional pyramid, demanding to be taken seriously. Is there not something almost poetic about a club from Versailles having to earn everything the hard way, given that the city they represent was built on the idea that nothing needs to be earned at all? First half Dijon imposed themselves from the first whistle with the kind of purposeful aggression that tells you immediately this is a home side that has prepared specifically for this opponent rather than simply showing up and expecting quality to prevail. The pressing is high, the transitions are quick, and the questions being asked of Versailles in these opening exchanges are tactically specific rather than generically aggressive. Who exactly put this game plan together, and how long did it take to build? The first goal arrives through a combination of sustained pressure and a moment of defensive uncertainty from Versailles that raises an immediate question: was that error the product of Dijon's pressure, or would it have happened regardless? The distinction matters enormously because one suggests a tactical plan working perfectly and the other suggests a stroke of fortune. The finish, at least, is entirely Dijon's own, controlled, deliberate, and placed with a precision that speaks to genuine quality. 1-0, and Versailles now face the most uncomfortable calculation in away football: how much of the game plan survives after conceding this early? Second half Dijon's second goal does something that second goals in dominant performances always do: it simultaneously ends the contest as a competition and raises a new, more interesting question. Why does a 2-0 lead sometimes feel more precarious than a 1-0 lead? There is a psychological phenomenon in football where the team that is winning 2-0 begins to manage rather than attack, and that management so frequently invites the opposition back into a game that should already be buried. Does Dijon fall into that trap, or do they have the discipline to stay on the front foot? The answer is that they manage the game intelligently without ever fully surrendering control, and that balance between protection and aggression is one of the most difficult things a team at any level can achieve. 2-0 at the final whistle. Dijon win with something that looks remarkably like authority. Chad 0-0 Burundi pre-match. Central African football operates under conditions that most European supporters would find almost incomprehensible. The infrastructure, the travel, the heat, the surfaces, the sheer logistical complexity of getting 2 international squads onto the same pitch at the same time, all of it conspires against the simple act of playing a football match. So when Chad and Burundi line up for a competitive fixture, what exactly are they competing for beyond the points? What does this occasion mean to the communities that have produced these players? Burundi have been quietly developing as a football nation for a number of years now, and quiet development in African football is always worth tracking because it tends to announce itself loudly at the precise moment the wider world least expects it. Is today that announcement, or is this still part of the process? Match the game is goalless, but to call it uneventful would be to completely misread what is happening on the pitch. Both sides are creating moments, incomplete moments, frustrating moments, moments that stop just short of the finish line in ways that make you wonder whether the goalkeepers are exceptional today or whether the finishing is below the standard the chances deserve. Which explanation is more generous, and which is more accurate? Chad have the majority of their best moments in the first half, and the most fascinating question their performance raises is why a team that dominates territorially so frequently fails to convert that dominance into goals. Is territory in football genuinely as valuable as it appears, or is it the most misleading statistic the sport produces? Burundi asked their own questions in the second half, and those questions come with a directness that Chad's defense finds increasingly uncomfortable without ever finding completely unanswerable. 0-0 at the final whistle, a point each, and somewhere in that shared point is a story about two football nations finding their level in the most honest way the sport allows. Kobe 1-0 Hiroshima pre-match. Japanese football has spent 30 years building something that now quietly demands the respect of the global game, and fixtures like this one, two professional clubs with genuine identity and tactical sophistication, are the evidence of that construction made visible. Kobe versus Hiroshima is not simply a regional rivalry, it is a conversation between two football philosophies, two ways of interpreting the game that Japan has made its own. Which philosophy wins today? Hiroshima travel with a resilience that their football history supports entirely. This is not a club that arrives as a visitor and simply accepts what the occasion demands of them. They shape occasions. They impose. Does Kobe understand that well enough to prepare for it, or will the familiarity of a domestic rival breed a complacency that costs them? Match. The single goal that separates these two sides is a masterpiece of patience rewarded. Kobe spend large portions of this match probing a Hiroshima defensive structure that is compact, organized, and genuinely difficult to break. Why does Japanese football so consistently produce defensive organizations of this quality? Is it cultural, tactical, or simply the product of a coaching infrastructure that prioritizes structure above everything else? The goal, when it comes, is earned rather than gifted, a reward for persistence, for the willingness to keep asking the question even when the answer keeps coming back as no 1-0. Hiroshima push for the equalizer with the kind of quality that makes Kobe's clean sheet feel more impressive in retrospect than it did in the moment. The final whistle confirms the narrowest of victories, and narrow victories in Japanese football always feel more meaningful than their margin suggests. Harrogate 0-2 Notts County pre-match. Notts County on the road. Is there a more reliable narrative in League Two football right now than this one? The world's oldest professional football club has developed a habit of arriving at grounds where they are not expected to dominate and proceeding to do exactly that. Does Harrogate know what is coming, or does knowing and preventing represent a gap too wide to bridge today? Harrogate are a club whose football league journey is still relatively recent, and there is always a fascinating tension in sides like this between the excitement of belonging and the pressure of maintaining it. Today that tension is tested by an opponent who has absolutely no interest in making it comfortable. Match County impose themselves on this game with a confidence that never tips into arrogance, which is perhaps the most dangerous kind of confidence to face. They move the ball with a purpose that Harrogate's midfield cannot match, and in the gaps that movement creates, County find the first goal with a composure that makes the difficulty of the task look almost unfair. 1-0 away from home. Now the question is whether Harrogate can reset, or whether County will sense the opening and push immediately for a second. The second goal answers that question before Harrogate have finished asking it. County find it with the kind of clinical efficiency that top-of-division sides produce, not with brilliance, but with the calm execution of a team that has done this often enough that the mechanism is almost automatic. 2-0. Harrogate are not out of effort, but they are out of answers, and in football those two things feel identical from the outside. The final whistle confirms what felt inevitable from the moment County took the lead. Barnet 2-0 Cambridge pre-match. Non-league to the Football League. Back down, back up. The Barnet story is one of English football's most cyclical narratives, and there is something genuinely compelling about a club that keeps finding its way back to the professional pyramid regardless of what the pyramid does to them on the way through. Does that resilience live in the brickwork of the ground, or is it something that gets passed from one generation of supporters to the next like an inheritance that cannot be spent? Cambridge arrive with their own story, their own pressures, and a league position that demands results rather than performances. The distinction between those two things is the most uncomfortable conversation any football club can have with itself. Match Barnet's first goal changes the entire atmosphere of this fixture in a way that no pre-match analysis could have predicted. It is not simply that the home side leads, it is the manner of the goal, the combination of directness and technical quality, that makes Cambridge appear to ask themselves a question they cannot immediately answer. Why does a goal scored with genuine quality have a different psychological impact than a goal that arrives through fortune? Is the opponent's discouragement somehow proportional to the quality of what has beaten them? The second goal is the statement that removes all remaining ambiguity. 2-0, and Cambridge must now decide whether to commit fully to an equaliser that would require them to open up in ways Barnet will absolutely exploit, or to cut their losses and attempt to preserve something from the afternoon. They choose the former, it does not work, and the final whistle arrives to confirm that today belongs entirely to the home side. Reading 1-0 Wigan pre-match. Reading and Wigan, two clubs whose recent histories contain more turbulence than either fanbase would ever have chosen to experience. Both have been higher, both have suffered, both now find themselves competing in a division that requires consistent performance from squads that have not always had the resources to build consistency into the foundations. So when these two meet, what exactly is the emotional subtext of the occasion? Are the supporters watching a match, or are they watching a reflection of where their clubs currently stand? Match. The single goal that decides this fixture is a product of a first half that neither side fully controls. Reading are the better side in patches, Wigan are the better side in patches, and the patches refuse to align neatly into any coherent narrative until the moment the ball is in the net. Why does football so frequently resist the narrative that logic tries to impose on it? Reading find the goal at the precise moment when Wigan appear to have stabilised after a difficult 20-minute spell. That timing is not accidental, it is the product of a home side that has maintained its pressure even when the immediate rewards were not arriving. 1-0. Wigan now face the challenge of equalising against a team that defends with the specific desperation of a side that has waited a long time for a clean sheet. That desperation, properly channeled, is almost impossible to break down. Reading hold on. 1-0 at the final whistle, and 3 points that mean considerably more than 3 points. Blackpool 1-0 Burton pre-match. Blackpool vs Burton carries the specific electricity of two League One sides who understand, perhaps better than most, that every home game is a referendum on the season. Win and the trajectory bends upward. Drop points and questions that were already being asked in the stands become considerably louder. Which team has the mental architecture today to handle that pressure productively rather than destructively? Burton arrive having done their homework, and Burton always do their homework. There is a thoroughness about the way this club prepares that reflects something deep in its football culture. Has that thoroughness found Blackpool's vulnerabilities, or will the home advantage prove more decisive than any tactical preparation? The goal that wins this game is the product of a second half that finds Blackpool operating at a level of intensity their home support responds to loudly and immediately. The first half has been a careful, somewhat conservative affair, two teams respecting each other's threat, neither willing to overcommit. But football matches rarely end the way they begin, and Blackpool's winner arrives through a combination of quality and conviction that the first half gave very little indication was coming. 1-0. Burton push back with everything they have, and the final 15 minutes test Blackpool's defensive nerve in ways that the scoreline eventually validates. 1-0 at the whistle. Narrow. Sufficient. Enough. Exeter 1-2 Leyton Orient pre-match. Here is the match of the day in terms of pure narrative drama, and it has not even kicked off yet. Exeter are a club with deep roots in the community football tradition, a fanbase that takes genuine ownership of the institution, and a recent history of competing at levels that once seemed entirely out of reach. Leyton Orient are travelling with something to prove in a division that has tested them in ways they did not fully anticipate. What happens when a club with deep roots meets a club with a point to prove? First half Exeter take the lead, and for 20 minutes this looks like it might be a comfortable afternoon for the home side. The goal is well crafted, the crowd responds with the kind of warmth that St James Park generates uniquely, and Orient look shaken by the speed at which their defensive organisation has been bypassed. 1-0. Everything is going to plan. So why does the feeling persist that Orient are not finished? Is it something in the way they respond after conceding, or is it simply the instinct of a crowd that has seen enough football to know that 1-0 never means what it appears to mean? Second half Orient come out for the second half as though the interval has been the most productive 45 minutes of their entire season. The change is not subtle, it is not gradual, it is immediate and complete. They press higher, they win more second balls, they find combinations in midfield that were entirely absent in the first half, and within minutes the equaliser arrives. How does a team transform so completely between two halves of the same match? What is said in those dressing rooms that produces such a fundamental shift in both execution and belief? 1-1, and now Exeter face the test that Orient have imposed. Can they absorb the momentum swing, reset their own belief, and reclaim control of a game that has been taken from them with alarming speed? The answer, unfortunately for the home faithful, is no. Orient find a winner through a move that carries the full weight of their second half dominance, patient, purposeful, and finished with a conviction that makes the goal feel inevitable even as it is happening. 2-1 to Leyton Orient. Exeter have lost a game they were winning. Orient have won a game they were losing. And between those two realities lies the most enduring truth football ever produces: nothing is decided until everything is decided. 8 matches, 8 entirely different emotional journeys arriving at the same destination, a final whistle and a scoreline that captures nothing of what the afternoon actually contained. Dijon proved that authority is a choice made every minute rather than a status granted once. Chad and Burundi proved that 0-0 can be the most honest result a game produces. Kobe proved that patience is a form of attacking football. Notts County proved that consistency on the road is the most underrated quality in any division. Barnet proved that home advantage is real and powerful and worth protecting. Reading proved that 1 goal, defended with everything a team has, is worth exactly the same as 5. Blackpool proved that second-half conviction can rewrite a first-half story. And Leyton Orient proved the thing that football has been proving every single weekend for over a century, that the game is never over until the game is over, and even then you find yourself wondering what might have happened with just 1 more minute on the clock.